Something that I find concerning in the modern political climate is the fact that liberals are sort of like being associated with things that are nothing to do with liberals. Generally speaking, I consider myself a liberal. However, when I see any kind of discussion or comment about liberals, it's from a perspective of wishy-washy or weakness or mockery. You get this with all political parties and all political institutions, but the word liberal as a belief structure isn't really a political party, and it's a bit of a shame that the word liberal has been mixed up with political parties, because liberalism as a concept is extremely important. It's something that has always existed and, generally speaking, has always been a positive in everybody's lives, even the authoritarians. I suppose in this video I'm going to say what is a liberal, why liberals are so important, where people are probably misunderstanding the concept of liberalism, and how I think it's actually quite dangerous for the progression of humanity. Oh, there's that word progression again, which has also been co-opted, and is a very important word that shouldn't be co-opted, but such is the nature of politics. People latch onto things and drive them into the ground until there's nothing left but dust. You can't use the word anymore because it's got so many connotations. How can they be represented in politics without being a political party? Why we vote and keep getting the same thing? And generally sort of like try and highlight some questions that a lot of people think about the meaning of life. I know it's quite a tough topic to handle on just a light-hearted YouTube video, but we're going to go for it. We're going to delve into the human soul and discover why authoritarians need liberals, and why liberals need authoritarians, and how they work together to make everybody's life progressively better. So to describe what a liberal is actually very easy. There is just one defining trait which governs everything that a liberal is or stands by as a principle. And that is leniency. Whatever the topic, the liberal will normally come down on the more lenient side of what an authoritarian says is what has to be. And throughout history, we have always been ruled by authoritarians. We'll come to authoritarians later. But the liberal is always the one that says, wait a minute, I don't think they should have their head chopped off for that. I think that's over-egging the pudding a bit. There's a billion different ways you can punish somebody in this world, and chopping the head off just seems a little bit extreme. You think that's a bit barbaric. And the authoritarian, you know, the book says, you know, for what they've done, head chopping. So that's what we're going to do. And life isn't by the book necessarily. Let's say it's a head-chopping offence to pick your nose in public. There are lots of weird rules in the world. It's not impossible to imagine a society that has decided one day by their, you know, typically mad authoritarian overlord that picking your nose in public is now a capital offence, where the punishment is head removal. So, you know, being law-abiding citizens, we all then abide this rule. Every time we're out, we get a tickle. Oh, no, don't do it. And you know, some poor fella, you know, thought they were in, thought they were in a corner, and he was looking, and you know, somebody walks in, pick your nose, and because they're a law-abiding citizen, they now witness you picking your nose, and if they don't tell the police, they're now an accessory, and so by the book. So, you know, cops are cool, blokes had it, you know, off to jail, picking his nose on telly. Horrible man picks his nose, up with his head, and you know, we can debate the rights and wrongs of that, but where the issue then arises, which is what really gets people's goats up, is the problem being injustice. In that, okay, you can have your rule about nose picking, we don't mind, but that bloke clearly didn't pick his nose. Not that bloke I just mentioned, but another bloke who was wandering about, and a bee came and sat on his nose. Any human being who has a bee sat on their nose, especially if they've got a bee phobia, oh shit, you know. And another passerby from a slightly different angle that didn't catch the bee has seen this bloke, they think they picked their nose. And this other person, they're paranoid now because they don't want to be an accessory, So they call the police. I think I've seen somebody pick their nose. Here come the cops, I'm sorry, sir, we've had somebody say you picked your nose. And the bloke's like, no, there was a bee. It's like, oh, no. And the cops are like, well, that's just your story, mate. We've got a witness. And the witness comes along and, yeah, it definitely looked like a nose pick to me. I didn't see any bees at all. The bees down the bank and they're over there. And there we go. The cops, have to do their duty. They've got, can you prove there was a bee on your nose? I wasn't particularly prepared to be proving I had a bee on my nose at that particular time. And there we go. Off he goes in the cuffs into jail. It comes to court. Head chops off. And then a few days later, an owner of a cafe over the road just got back from holiday or whatever. He spent a year in Australia. He's been doing well recently, and he fancied a bit of a break, so he's closed up shop and gone to Australia, and he's come back and reopened again and had a bit of a refurb while he was away. That was part of it. Take the opportunity to refurb the establishment, and he gets back and he hears about this story, and he thinks, oh, that was outside my shop. I wonder if I've got that on camera. And he looks through his CCTV. Oh my God, the camera picks up the bee. Releases it, goes viral. Everybody's like, what the? Massive encourage of justice. Bloke's had his head chopped off because he had a bee land on his nose. It's irrational, it's madness. We can't go on just chopping people's heads off on the hearsay of random people saying they've picked their nose in public, you know what I mean? And that's where the liberal comes in, you see. It's like, well, we did try to tell you, it's not ideal to have any kind of final punishment like that, because there will always exist in the human condition the nuance. An authoritarian by default cannot conceptualise, because in order to conceptualise the nuance, they can't have the total authority. They can't put in the book, head chopped off, unless a bee lands on the nose. And then have 5 million different nuance subsections of when you can actually pick your nose. Every time somebody gets their head chopped off and it's found out that there's a different reason why their finger approached their nose at that particular time, it's another subsection, billions and billions of subsections. At that point, it's like the authoritarian is just saving their face. They're doubling down and doubling down and doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. And the liberal is there as a human condition. The liberalness of the human condition is there to rationalise the authoritarian dictate. That makes sense to everybody. If the authoritarian is going a bit loopy, and by necessity an authoritarian has to go a bit loopy, the liberal exists as the counterbalance. And don't get me wrong here, the existence of liberal in our human condition does not invalidate authority. The liberal condition requires authority. It requires the authority to be authority, for the liberal voice to be heard within that authority. In the case of the nose picking, if a liberal came to power and was put in the position of authority, that is automatically hypocritical, because the liberal wants a more lenient stance on the head chopping for the nose picking. So they can't stand there and be the leader of the authoritarian system while people's heads are being chopped off for nose picking. The liberal is forced to remove the rule of head chopping for nose picking. And now there can be any scale of reduction in the crime, like they could completely legalise nose picking, and nose picking in public would no longer be a crime. That would be an extreme, the other way, reversal of that rule. They could do that. Or they could just say, we're not going to chop people's heads off for nose picking anymore. It's just life imprisonment. 20 years plus, whatever the judge thinks. And that's a tiny little movement away from the extremity of a head removal. And between those gaps, that's all liberal. The authoritarian is just the head chopping. And generally speaking, most organisational authoritarian structures in history are mostly liberal, because the authority figure takes over a scenario that has existed prior. And the existence that existed prior was thousands of years of authoritarians being moderated by liberals. But the problem is, you see, once that liberal authoritarian, the liberal authority that has been brought into power to get rid of the crazy authoritarian of the day, once they've changed that rule to be more lenient on the nose picking, their job is done. And the problem is, a society needs authority to exist. Otherwise, what you have is chaos. And this goes back to the problem of humanity that has been identified readily throughout history, that our societies do tend to drift between chaos and authoritarianism. Because that's human nature. And human nature is the inherent human condition of either being liberal on a subject or authoritarian on a subject. And that difference is purely whether you want to be more strict or more lenient. You can extrapolate that to any scenario, be it a workplace, a school, the government, even just a group of friends. There will always be the authoritarian leader, as it were, with authoritarian ideas on how everybody else should behave. And everybody else is some version of liberal. Of course, they won't say that they're liberal. If that authority says, I hate liberals, and authoritarians generally do have to hate liberals, because they have to double down on all their rules. Otherwise, chaos ensues. So you have this constant struggle between those who aren't happy with the authority and the authority who's not happy with the people. But the people, they need that authority, because of course in chaos you don't want to walk out into the street and have somebody just chop off your head because they think that's a jolly good laugh. Basic common sense. I think we've known that for quite a few thousand years now. Similarly, we want the authoritarian to be aware that that's not how we want society. And the authoritarian is going to say, okay then, yeah, sounds like a good thing to me. I don't particularly, I must admit that's something I agree with. I don't want to walk down the street and have my head randomly removed. That's I can't exist in that kind of scenario, so I understand your point of view. The person who cuts the head off you randomly, they're the ones who are going to get punished in the most severe ways. So an agreement has been reached. The authoritarian is in agreement with the people that we as all do not want to live in a society where heads get randomly removed. Makes sense, right? But of course, it's not just heads removed. There's hundreds of thousands of different issues and complaints and policies that govern society and that people want and need. And there's a constant flow of authority stamping down in order to make the people happy to justify the authority that they need. So what the history of the world or civilization, groups of people with rules, is essentially a constant flow from the authoritarian, keeping the people happy so that the people are happy with the authoritarian. It's in their self-interest to stay the authority, so they want to keep the people happy. The people want the authoritarian to be happy so that they've got protection. It's all a big protection racket, you know, by human nature. The history of civilization is just a constant flow between more lenient and more strict. More lenient and more strict. And any sane person naturally wants to be the authority. There's huge competition to be the authority. You get to, you know, being the authority, you can pretty much do what you want. It's magic land. The world is your oyster. So you have competing authorities. So when you look at a political system and you see 4 political parties, they are all the same thing. They are all authoritarians. None of them are liberal. They all want to have the power to tell you what to do by their own vision, because that enables them to do whatever they like and shape the world as they would like individually. And that is how it's always been. So where does the liberal fit into that? How do you vote for a liberal? Well, when authoritarian parties compete, so for example, political party A, they chop the heads off for nose picking. Political party B, life imprisonment for nose picking. But they chop heads off for tooth picking in public. You know, next party, they're against chopping heads off for tooth picking. That's just life imprisonment for them. And they're against nose picking. That, they want to legalise that. But they chop heads off for bum scratching. And then the other party, the fourth party, they think it's all nonsense. You know, they think nose picking is wrong, nose picking is all right. Tooth picking is fine, bum scratching, love that. No, decriminalise it all. But they're going to chop the heads off people who try to bring back nose scratching or tooth picking or bum scratching. So between the 4 parties, you kind of pick where they're liberal by comparison to what they object to from the other authoritarian, and then accept whatever their new authoritarian is. I mean, it sounds like a mess, doesn't it? And that's what it is. That's what life is. It's a complete mess. That's part of the chaos that I was talking about. Because if you had a political party that was just, I don't care what you do, fine with it all, then you get your head randomly chopped off when you're walking down the street. Essentially, with the 4 parties, they all appear liberal to each other, and they all appear authoritarian once they're in power and doing their thing. So whatever you do, you always have the authoritarian in control. The person in control will never be a full liberal. They will be an authoritarian who has some opinions which appear liberal in comparison to another authoritarian figure wanting their particular way of thinking to be zoned in on everybody. So what do you mean when you say you're a liberal? Well, societies are so vast, you know, millions of people, and politics generally, and any authoritarian structure, is so detached from the individual that an individual doesn't need to have an opinion on any of the parties. Approximately 30% of humanity just kind of tries to abide by the rules and will likely have opinions that many of the rules are either stupid or should be more lenient. And it's these 30% that get touted to by authoritarians, be on my side, be on my side, no, be on my side. It's this 30% that actually have a very difficult life. It's like hard mode. And by default, probably most people in prison are in there because they're sort of like a bit liberal-minded. And this sounds a bit weird because you can speak to somebody who's been in prison and they can appear like a complete mental psychopath on the very extreme ends of the scale. And on a lot of topics they might be. But they've obviously decided by themselves that one particular rule from the authority doesn't apply to them. And they've decided to be liberal. So they've ended up in jail. And the whole thing is about humanity, again, is that generally speaking, we all break laws, minor to major, everything in between. It's almost impossible to get through life without breaking some kind of rule or other. And it's very difficult for anybody to admit that they've broken a rule because, the second you admit it, the cops come round, oh, you've admitted to something, off you go. Let's take some famous examples. Donald Trump, one minute he's breaking lots of rules, he's off to prison, the next minute he's not, he's the pres, and now he's the authority. And he's no longer broken rules because he's the authority. You can argue that Donald Trump is an authoritarian and all his fans will tell you that liberals are scum and blah, 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 blah. But they don't mean liberals because Donald Trump is a liberal, otherwise he wouldn't have broken rules. And they'll say, well, he didn't break rules. Yeah, I know, because he's the authority, you can say he didn't break them. Okay, right, okay. So, we have to accept that. That's what our obligation is now under the new regime. So, but you can't say, well, Donald Trump's a liberal. And he used to be a Democrat, but that's a different topic because Democrats aren't really liberals. But anyway, they're another authority. Anyway, so, but you can't, if you try and communicate this kind of information, that's when the trolls rush in. The second you say, but, well, Donald Trump's a liberal, they'll all rush, etc., etc. And, to make sure that this is sort of like a neutral position that everybody can understand without raging and blowing their heads up and, having fights about stuff. Bill Clinton, he broke a rule. Well, according to Monica Lewinsky, anyway, And there was lots of court cases then. And obviously Bill Clinton, had a moment of liberalism. And liberalism is inherent in every single human. It just vanishes as soon as you're the authority. And you can't vote for liberalism because inherently liberalism is not authoritarian. You can only maintain a liberal perspective by being a person who chooses between authority. And everybody under that authority is a lawbreaker of some kind. They have chosen to be liberal on a law. Law books, massive, you'd be amazed. We all live in a constant denial that we are liberal inherently, because we have to, because the authoritarian demands that. So that's like the outward face that we have to present, is that we are not liberal. But internally, we are all liberal. So we've established we're all criminals, but we're all law-abiding citizens as part of our basic human condition. So how can this be construed in a way that correlates to the fact that this process has progressively made the world a better place for everybody in a general sense? Obviously, whatever today's grievances are will be tomorrow's better world once they're resolved. So don't get fixated on saying that the world isn't a better place and that the past was a better place at any point in the past, because it's mathematically impossible for that to be the case. Because century after century after century, moving into millennia after millennia after millennia, we've had authoritarians trying to please the people, who are in turn trying to please the authoritarians to create a more stable society that everybody can agree is pretty good. And each little adjustment along the way, every time one authoritarian either gets removed, pops his clogs, gets voted out, whatever the system is, liberalism occurs in that a new authority emerges and changes the rules, makes some things more lenient, other things more harsh. But in a way, they have to do it that still keeps all the people happy. Otherwise, they get the chop, they get the idea. So, as the time progresses, each little shift, don't like this, like that, don't like this, don't like that, piece by piece, it gets slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. But you don't see it. You can't conceptualize it because you're living under an authority that by necessity has rules in place that you don't like. And there's a very high likelihood that it'll punish you for not liking those rules. But what you can't sense, but has already happened, is that lots of rules that you definitely wouldn't have liked have been wiped out by the evolution of civilization. I suppose by some kind of majority osmosis. We have to take on the battles of today in order to create the progress for tomorrow. But of course the word progress doesn't necessarily mean that one specific thing that one political party or their opposition think it means. And generally speaking, around the whole world, the number of people, for example, who have their head randomly chopped off when they're wandering about is much lower than it used to be in the past. That's the kind of thing that you can see progressively over the centuries and millenniums has reduced in society. You'd have to go to undiscovered tribes in jungles to get back to an authority where just having a little wander about could very well result in your head being chopped off, just for wandering about, because you're whatever the authority doesn't like that you've just randomly wandered into. Don't like that one. Liberal concepts tend to rise to the surface in political discourse predominantly when it becomes evident that the authority, or whatever that authority is, feels like it's regressing to a time when you could just get your head chopped off for wandering down the road. Some recent examples that might sort of like might make it easier to resonate. It's sort of like when communism was very popular as a political concept, and some countries started instigating, communism as their basis for authority. People were getting their heads chopped off or disposed of in other ways for having alternate beliefs, for example. And the whole alternate beliefs thing is a very hot topic for authoritarians, The more communism found itself diving into this desperation well of head removals, the more the people gradually moved away from it, started backing off. And this happens very consistently with all authoritarian structures, and the longer that the same principle stays in authority, particularly the same individual, over time, more and more heads get chopped off. And the more that the heads get chopped off, the more people down below know who, friends with them, friends relation, creating more and more, you're attacking more and more cells within your organism. You're chopping off more of your own limbs, you know what I mean? Eventually, there's just so much discontentment which can't be identified. An authoritarian can't chop off somebody's head for discontentment because they don't know who's discontent, because everybody's got the face on. Everybody's got the law-abiding citizen face on, but inside they're all liberal. So the authoritarian starts lashing about, whacking everything. And then you get the injustices, which make it worse. And eventually it becomes untenable, and that authority fades into existence, and a new authority takes its place. I hope this all makes sense. I probably said that a couple of times, but very, very complex subjects like this, it's too much, isn't it? It's like, to know too much is to know nothing. How does this help? It hasn't helped anything, has it? Because I've still got an authority and I've still got structure. You haven't told me whether I should be for or against this specific one rule. Yes, that's the thing about discussing the human condition in a political context, is that the human condition is nebulous. But the main thing, the main piece of understanding that you can get from this, from what I've been saying, if nothing else makes sense to you, if the concept isn't something you can grasp, if this all just sounds like random waffle to be ignored like all the other random wafflers, just take this one basic soundbite, as it were, and that's that when you're accepting an authority, i.e. somebody who's speaking to you with an opinion, from a very basic level, you can instantly work out the extent to which they're an authoritarian and the extent to which they're liberal by whether they like to make punishments for crimes more severe, or whether they want to make punishment for crimes less severe. That's all you need to know. More severe, authoritarian. Less severe, liberal. And it doesn't matter what the subject matters are. Somebody might have a face on that they're liberal, but then you'll hear them say, I saw somebody picking their nose the other day. It's disgusting. I think they should get 20 years for that. And you think, oh, I thought they were a bit liberal. But it seems not. It seems their impulse when they see a crime is to automatically wish to promote severity of punishment. Whereas a liberal would see somebody pick their nose and think, ooh, well, he's done something a bit naughty. Let's think about the nuances of nose picking for a minute. Would I ever pick my nose? Could I pick my nose? If I pick my nose, you know what I mean. Has a bit of self-awareness, if you like.